Hey everyone, I'm Gracie. Welcome to the Grace of a Military Child podcast. The world should know how unique military children are. We may look like normal children on the outside, but we go through some pretty extraordinary circumstances that shape us to the leaders we are today. Keep listening to hear the incredible journey this week's guest has been on. Hi Ashley, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Gracie.
Good. Thank you. I'm super excited to have you on and have you be a part of the podcast.
I'm really excited. I was really excited that you asked for me to be on here because as a military kid, I love sharing my experience, and it's interesting to hear other people's experiences because we're very similar, but it's very different at the same time.
Yeah, military children are so unique, and while we have a similar story of being a military child, every single child experiences something completely different, and it's so interesting to hear the different stories.
It is. My husband's a military child too, and we have completely opposite spectrums of how our experience was. He never moved. I moved all the time. I probably moved 18 times by the time I turned 18.
Oh my goodness.
So not all of those were PCS moves, but majority of them were. But some of them were moving to a different school district or moving jobs. So we moved to a different part of the town so we could be closer to that position. So I moved so many times. And so here, my husband's side, he moved twice. So it was really interesting to hear how crazy his life was and mine. So.
Yeah, it's definitely so interesting. I've heard many stories like yours where, some people move every single year of high school or,
That was me.
Yeah, exactly.
That was me. I went to a different high school, different countries.
Yeah, so there's definitely people like that out there. I have only moved twice also. So I did, my dad was in the reserve, so we didn't, have the option to move as much because we were pretty much stationary in Ohio. And then he was injured on a deployment, so we got to move to Texas. And then once he retired, we moved to Florida. So it was basically all of my moves that I've had. I haven't had many more than that.
Yeah, I have been all over the place. We started here at Fort Bragg. My stepdad, who raised me and I lived with throughout my entire childhood, was a ranger when I was younger. And as I got older into middle school time frame, he reclassed to Special Forces retention. So we moved a lot because of that.
Yeah.
They kind of put him where he needed. I was one of those dependents, military kids who moved every single year of high school. I was in Germany my freshman year. Then my dad went to the Sergeant Major's Academy my sophomore year. So we went to Texas for a year. Not even a year. That school's only 9 months long. So we weren't even there we were there for a full school year, but that was it.
Wow.
And then went back to Germany for my junior year. And then we moved back here to Fort Bragg my senior year.
Oh my goodness. That's a lot.
And I hated every minute of it. So it was so funny because I didn't like moving around. I was really into sports. I didn't like having to prove myself every single year to the coaches. I had done varsity every single year. My senior year, I'd finish school and go to college. So for the first couple years of I'm a military guy, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
I don't want that life anymore, sweetheart. We met my senior year when I moved back to Fort Bragg, and I knew it wasn't sure if he was going to do the career thing or anything like that. I honestly didn't know if we would make it further than, just dating high school year, maybe a couple years in college. And 15 years later, we are still together. Been a military spouse majority of that time. And if I hadn't moved, if I hadn't done all that, I would have never met my husband.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have all the experiences I have. I've got to see the world. I brag that my biggest quality trait of mine is how adaptable I'm in. I can literally adapt on a switch. Sometimes I may not go willingly, but I can transition a lot quicker than I've noticed some of my civilian friends can do to change to crisis and things like that.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that the military life gives, the dependents and, service members, spouses, children, all alike. It gives the adaptability and flexibility. And it's just something so unique because we can adapt, at the drop of a dime. We can figure something out. If something's not working, we can make it work.
Yeah, so my husband unit here at Fort Bragg has been a part of the 3 short notice activations in the last 18 months. So I am really actually so thankful that I've been able to have those experiences to adapt from my childhood to be able to be like, okay, I'm focused. I know what I need to do. And I'm not like, I could see like my spouses that I worked with, I'm also an FRG leader. So, which I do because I know the importance of it as being a dependent, knowing how they helped us when we were growing up.
Yeah.
My spouses who did not grow up military to the ones that were military kids, it's a huge difference. And you could tell that the military kids were like, okay, we got this. Like, we know this sucks. We're adaptable. We can do this. And then the other ones who've never really experienced something like this, just didn't handle it as well as the others. So it really is a trait that, like, I tell my families that I speak to that, they're so worried, like, we're moving so much, like, how my kids can keep friends, how are they going to do this? And I'm like, look, my best friend I've had for over 15 years. She's my best friend from my junior year in high school. And I would have never met her if we didn't move. She's like my sister. And we talk all the time.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll go through stretches where we don't talk at all, but we pick right back up. And it's just because we're busy and we're adults and your kids are going to be fine. My husband, who didn't move all that often, occasionally talks to his friends from high school. But he doesn't like every single day like I do.
Right.
So I think it kind of helps with that as well.
I think so too. And especially, I haven't had an overseas move. Mine were just in the States, but having friends like on the other side of the globe or, even a couple states away or whatever it may be, that puts a whole nother level of, I guess, pressure to keep those friendships. Mm-hmm. And it takes a little more work. And even, those times where, I may not talk to a friend or whatever the case may be, like you said, we just pick right back up where we left off.
Yeah, I probably have closer relationships with a lot of my friends overseas, or at least I keep in touch more with those. I don't know if it's just because that's where I built the strongest relationships. We were all military kids. Like, there wasn't a mix. Like, here, when you're here stationed, like here at Fort Bragg, you have a mix of civilian kids and military kids. Right. Whereas like when we were stationed overseas, it was either all military kids or contractor kids, which are pretty much in essence military kids.
Yes.
So it was interesting because I don't keep in contact with any of my civilian friends growing up. I may have a few of my Facebook friends, but the ones I actively talk to all the time with are the military kids. But I think that's because we share experiences. I grew up, I was in middle school when 9/11 happened. And so I vividly remember that happening, coming home from school. I was overseas, so it was late afternoon for us. And I remember all of us there, remembering this is changing our lives forever because we're military and we know that our parents, whoever's the active service member, is most likely going to be affected by this in some way or form. And it just so happened that my dad was one of the very first soldiers into Iraq when we went into Iraq. So, he was there for 19 months. So it was really, I think those are the friends I'm the closest with. And that's because we went through something so traumatic in terms of this is changing the course of U.S. history, but also our parents just had to up and leave fairly quickly and for a really long time, into an unknown world. So it was, you just kind of connect with those people, and those shared experiences help you. And so I feel like military kids, like what I keep telling my kids, they're really young, so they haven't really understand like people are moving kind of thing. But we have a bunch of friends that are getting ready to PCS, and so they're going to start questioning, like, well, will we ever get to see them again? Are we ever going to talk to them again? I'm like, well, yeah, you just have to put the work into it. You know, you have to ask to call, or you can write them letters. I know that's a really dead thing nowadays, no one writes letters, but like, that's what we tell our kids to do. Like, yeah, write them a letter, draw them a picture, and we'll mail it. It's not a problem.
Yeah, and it's so easy to just, it sounds so difficult, but it's so easy to just put in that effort. Like, it takes like no time to make a phone call, send a message, or put a letter in the mail. Like, it takes a little while to get there, but it takes no time to just put a letter in the mail or do things like that. And from a young age, it's hard to understand, like, your friends are moving, or, you know, and will I ever see my friends again? And once you figure out, like, okay, I'll see my friends again, or, you know, we can stay in contact, we can stay in touch, then it becomes so much easier, and it creates that adaptability and resiliency in the military kids.
It does. And it's and another thing, like, the military community, like, the world is large, but the military community is really not that big. The amount of times I've walked through like the PX or the commissary at an installation, and then someone calls my name, and I'm like, oh my God, like, I didn't even know you were here. Like, I've run into probably 5 friends from my school age years, just walking through the PX, or, hey, I'm in town. I'm in town because I'm at the school, or I'm at this, or whatever it may be. And I'm like, that's great. Like, that's awesome. I mean, I've been in random small town country, like in a small town in like a random country, and I've run into people I've known like 5 or 6 years beforehand, just on vacation. And it's great. Like, it's so cool because, like, I had a friend who I went to middle school with, had the biggest crush on him, and just walking through the PX, not looking my best, even though I was married, but nonetheless, you never want your like high school crush or middle school crush to like see you like not cute. And he was just like, Ashley. And I'm like, who is calling my name? And it was so great to see him. I knew he was in Alaska. I just didn't know which installation he was at. And it was so cool to see him. And it was so cool to catch up with someone who was a really good friend of mine in high school, and to see what he's doing now. You know, he's got his own military career, which is really cool. And it's exciting to see what he took as a military kid and applied it to his career as well.
Yeah, and the military, growing up a military child, affects you in so many ways that you don't even realize until it hits you. Like, you know, doing this podcast, it's like there's so many other military children out there that it's like you don't realize that until you start doing it. The world seems so small, but military children just connect on another level. Military families in general,
they really do. You know, it's hard to explain to a family whose husbands or their mom, whoever is a service member, they're consistently gone. You know, it's hard to explain to your own kids, like, you know, daddy's at work. So like my kids are still really young. Mine are only 3 and 6. So trying to explain to them the military life is a little more difficult, but the degree of military kids are like in the terms of where they're at in their military life. Like, you know, you have some who are only military kids for a short period of time. You have some like myself and my husband who were military kids all the way from birth until we were out of college. You know, both our dads were sergeant majors. And so we grew up military, and it was one of those things where we saw some people who were only in the military for 3 or 4 years and never really saw them again. And then we had other friends who were also military kids who were like us, who were there long term.
Yeah, the military does. It sounds so bad to say it this way to you, but if you don't last, then you're gone. Like, yeah, it definitely weeds out those people.
Well, I think it's weird because like when you think about it, like, so like majority of the kids like I went to school with in Europe, middle school, high school age, they're pretty much lifelongers. Their parents are staying in for the 20 years,
Yes.
unless they joined later in life. We do have those, like, where they did something and then they eventually, like, their kids are like already 6, 7, 8, and then they decide to join the military. And you're seeing that more often now, I feel like. So
Yeah.
you have all those kids coming in, but like, I don't remember any of the kids from when I was younger, unfortunately. The friends I remember from when I was really young were all civilians, when I was stationed here at Fort Bragg. But like, I'm 33, so the bases have expanded drastically in those years. So there wasn't a lot of military kids out here where I lived when I was younger. Now it's majority military. So
Right.
I feel like a lot of things that I dealt with when I was a kid aren't necessarily the same today for like my son who's in school now.
Right. Yeah, it definitely changes. So my dad joined right out of high school and he joined Army. He was in Germany for a while, came back, he met my mom. And I was born a couple months after 9/11 and they got married actually 4 days after 9/11. And it was like totally planned and everything, and they just still kept it that same. And so my dad was on 30-minute recall during the wedding, which is crazy. Yeah. And his best man was too, and a couple of the groomsmen, I think. And so like they didn't get to go on a honeymoon or anything. And then I was born, and he was deployed. My sister was born a year later. He was deployed. So we were both deployment babies. And so, yes, for sure. Yes. Luckily, it was stateside deployment and he was able to be there. But, it's not everyone gets that. And so, like, growing up, he had a 7-year break in service. So I was kind of living in a civilian world. And then when I was 7 or 8, he joined again. He rejoined. He re-enlisted and joined Army Reserve. And so it was still kind of very civilian. I went to a civilian school and so many other things. And then when he got hurt, we moved to Texas. And that was like my first like real military experience, because reserve life is so different than active duty. And so living in Texas, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to these military schools. Like, I made friends and then they're moving like a couple months later. And trying to, configure that. And even then it was like 2012 when my first like real friend moved. And like we didn't have social media. We didn't have all of that. And so it's like I couldn't really stay in touch with my friends and stuff as they moved. And now like it's so much easier to stay in contact like we were saying earlier. And, I don't want to say it's easier to be a military child because it's still hard, but it's easier to navigate some of the things that we go through.
Yeah, 100%. Like this past probably like last 2 weeks, I've probably reconnected with 2 or 3 people that I went to school with overseas. And
right.
And like when I was little, there was no social media at all. So like I'm old enough to like we use MySpace, and like Facebook was still only for college people, and you had to like prove you're in college and things like that. So nowadays it's a lot easier to keep in contact. There's a lot more safer avenues to keep in contact, especially if you're younger. Where like when I was little, like it was literally like I vividly remember writing letters to my friends. Like I had a friend that I met in the 7th grade. And unfortunately she was only there for for the 7th grade year, and then she moved. Her dad got a job at the Pentagon, so she moved to DC, and so we wrote letters to each other fairly regularly, and I did that with a couple other friends as well. So but like I remember like the pen and paper and having like getting cute like stationery and like scented pens and things like that, because that was really big in the 90s and early 2000s. So it was it's very different. And I'm glad that there's more ways for friends to keep in contact with. I've friended friends of my son's parents just so they could keep in contact if they wanted to. And I know as he gets older, I mean, he's already asking for a phone and he's 6. And I'm like, you're not getting a phone. Like, I'm really sorry. He's like, well, how am I going to call my friends? And I'm like, you can use mommy's phone, but like, you are not getting your own phone. You're 6 years old, honey. But like, I can understand why military families do give their kids phones earlier, because sometimes they do need to have that connection with friends, especially if they don't do well with change, because not all military kids do well with change, even if they do it a lot.
Yeah, it takes a lot of learning, especially like I was not good with change at all. And so you have to learn to be, again, be adaptable, and you have to learn how to accept change as you move forward.
Yeah. Well, like, and it's okay to like not like it either. Like I said earlier, I absolutely hated it. I didn't like moving every single summer. I didn't like having to like start over. Like I said, like my freshman or my senior year, I was just like, I'm just gonna go take my classes and graduate. Like, I didn't want to really make friends, even though I made some really good friends. And I met my husband. But I just wasn't interested. Like, I didn't do sports that year. I was just like, I can't, like, I just don't have the mental capacity to prove my worth again. Because, by that point, senior year, you've done all 4 years. Your coaches know you in and out. They know what you're capable of. And I just didn't want to go in and just be like, hey, I've played varsity for 3 years. Like, just put me on the varsity team. Like, I had to go in like I was like a freshman and prove myself. And I wasn't interested. I wouldn't wish anybody having to move that often. In the time that it happened, I didn't like it. I was that teenager that was just like, you're making me move again. I'm going to go live with grandmother. I'm going to go live with my bio dad. Like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to move anymore. Yeah. But I stuck it out with my mom and my stepdad. I'm so glad I did. I would have never gone overseas. If you ever have the opportunity to go overseas, it's amazing. I love it. I hope we get to go one day. Now that I'm an adult and take my kids. It was by far my favorite experience. Living over there. And I made, like I said, all of my closest friends are from when I lived overseas.
Yeah, you get these closer friendships, and like you were saying with 9/11 and like going through those experiences together, people more, you get to understand what they're going through, they understand what you're going through, and you're able to connect on a deeper level.
Yeah, 100%. And those friendships that I made were like, during the deployments and things like that were the lasting ones. Like, we had ups and downs. But it was one of those, like, you went through this, I went through this, like, we're bonded. Like, we always will have this shared experience. And like, even now, like as a military spouse, having those experiences with other military spouses and their kids and the kids, like just seeing how it was very similar, but it's also very different at the same time.
Yeah.
Back then.
What is it like now, growing up a military child and now raising military children?
Well, so my kids, okay, so like my kids are still really young. We went through, so my kids are just like, my oldest is just now at that age where he's kind of like understanding like what military life is about. He was born in Alaska, and right after he was born, roughly 6 months after he was born, we got orders for recruiting duty. And we went to North Texas. We were part of the Dallas battalion. So we were north of Dallas in like the country land.
Yeah.
In Dallas, which we're not country, or we're not city people. We learned that country. We definitely are a suburbs country setting, and we experienced civilian life for the first time because both of us grew up military. We've always been around a military installation. I hated it.
Yeah.
I did not like being around people that were not military. I couldn't relate to a lot of people. It was hard for me to explain, like, I have to take off because my husband can't take off because he's in the military. My kid's sick. I can't, like, kind of thing. Like, it really sucked. I ended up losing a job. I got let go from a job because of things like that. And I was just like, well, this sucks. Cause like they weren't really understanding, even though like I made it like really clear up front, like, hey, like I am a military spouse. There are certain things that like my husband can't just take off if the kids are sick or things like that. So like if my kid is sick, like I have to take off. Like I'm willing to work from home and things like that. But it was really hard to connect with people who didn't have the experiences that I had, or had the understanding of like, well, military comes first, mission comes first, family kind of comes second kind of attitude, which is a really sucky kind of attitude to like, we have to deal with, but we didn't like it. I didn't like it. I was just like, I'm not ready to be a civilian.
Yes.
I need to be around my people, and my people are in the military. So they kind of had a civilian, like the first few years of their life, because my daughter was born there. So she was born in a civilian hospital. She doesn't remember any of that because she was like 10 months or roughly 10 months when we moved back to Fort Bragg, back to a line unit. So dad was home, but like he worked a lot of hours, but he wasn't ever gone like overnight. So or long periods of time. So they really didn't get a taste of that until we moved back here. And then they got the whammy. They got rapid deployment. Like we didn't even get to say goodbye the first time, back in 2020 at January 1st, 2020. And then, so that was crazy. I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to explain this to my kids because this is the first time they've really dealt with it. Like, you know, he'd gone to like JRTC, which is 4 weeks long. But we were just like, daddy's out learning, like he's in the field, he's learning kind of thing. Explaining to my kids like, well, daddy's not coming home. Sorry. Like, I don't know when he's coming home, was really difficult. And then they did it again that following summer. When there was all the DC rioting, they brought them in for that. Again, that was another 2-hour recall. I think my kids were in school. I don't even think they got to say goodbye to him either that time. And then it just happened again with Afghanistan, 2-hour recall. We were able to go say goodbye. But again, we didn't know how long it was going to be. So it was one of those like, well, be good, listen to mom, and I will see you when I see you kind of thing. So they've had a little bit of a kind of a, like, we're going to take this and go like 0 to 60 experience. But they're still young and they've handled it really, really well. Anytime I say like dad's gone, they're like, okay, cool. What are we going to do, mom? Like, what are we going to do when dad's gone? So like kind of thing. So they're good. I'm excited to see what they do when they grow up, but they probably won't be military kids their whole lives. We had kids later in our relationship. So, you know, my husband only has like 7 more years of service until he hits 20. So I don't think he plans to go after that for much longer. So, you know, my kids will be just entering middle school when we get out of the military. So they'll probably have more of a civilian life, but they'll have that military experience up until that point.
Yeah. And it's a weird transition from military to civilian or civilian to military. And I mean, like I was saying, my dad was reserve, so we really had more of a civilian life. And we had, you know, the 7-year break, which was very civilian. And then moving to Texas, it was complete military. And then we were there for like about 3 years for his recovery. And then we came back to the civilian after he retired. Our closest installation is about 2.5 hours away. So it's like, it's a hard hit of reality, more or less, once you get out and you join the civilian world again.
Yeah, it is. And we've had little tastes of it here and there. And I think growing up and going through me, especially for myself, like I move so much. So like, I get the itch, like I get that itching feeling of like, okay, we've been here for 3 years. Like, when are we moving?
Yeah.
But that's more along the lines, like, I don't want to move, but I want to know what that next adventure is going to be. Like, you know, when we first got the orders that we're going to Alaska, I was like, oh, this is not going to be fun. I had a blast. Like, I loved Alaska. Like, it was an amazing experience, and I would totally go back there over other installations in a heartbeat. But I know, like, not everyone has that experience. But I also, like, learned, because of being a military kid, you got to roll with the punches. Like, you have to take, like, okay, we've been presented this dilemma. How are we going to make pie out of it? Like, how are we going to be okay with what's happening? Like, I remember when we got the orders for Alaska. So initially we got orders for Fort Wainwright, which is in Fairbanks, but there's also a Fort Wainwright, Alaska, which is at the tip top of Alaska. Like, probably throw a stone and it would hit Russia. And my husband was like freaking out. Like, he was just like, population is like 100 people. And I was like, babe, if population is 100 people, that's not where we're going. I was like, that's 2 separate locations.
Right.
But, you know, as military kids, you make connections growing up. You know, your parents have connections, you've made connections. So through our connections, we were able to change those orders to J-Bear, which is in Anchorage. And so we had a great time. It was very different. But it was so much fun. And I think for people who are scared to move because of the unknown, and you have people who've never moved before, that's terrifying in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Going and experiencing something new would just say, I'm going to take this head on and make the very best of it. Then nothing, I mean, you may have some bumps in the road, but overall you'll have a good experience. People here can consistently, like, say Fort Bragg sucks. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, Bragg has its disadvantages, but it has its advantages too. Like, okay, Bragg is home of the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah.
Okay, you are an infantry brigade. Your job is to do the grunt work. Your job is to deploy all the time, to be in the field, training and honing in those expertise. So yeah, they're going to be in the field all the time. Like, that's not Bragg's fault. That's your spouse's MOS. Like,
yes,
that's what they chose to do as a job. So unfortunately, that's what they're going to do. And in order to be the best in the world, they have to do all the training. And they're like, well, there's nothing to do at Bragg. I'm like, well, yeah, you're right. There's nothing to do in the immediate area. But dude, you're 2 hours from the beach, and you're 3 to 4 hours from the mountains. Like, you're the best of both worlds. Like, where in the country? Yeah, where in the country do you have that? And then you're so close to other things. Like, you're a day trip to DC, you're a day trip to Atlanta, slightly further, you're to Florida. There's so much to do in the area. And so, like, every time I see things like that, I'm like, wait a minute, like, you're so close to so much stuff, and you would not have those opportunities at any other installation.
Yeah. And like, so we were at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, it was a really good base. I loved Fort Sam. And like, there's so much to do outside of the base that sometimes when you get bored of being somewhere, it's just like you have to do a little bit of research. You have to put in that little bit of work, and you can find something really cool and something unique about the area. Even if you can't really get off of the base, you can find something unique about the base. Like, there's so many things to do.
Yeah, I agree. Even like Fort Bragg has like a bunch of really cool things on the base. I mean, well, Fort Bragg's the largest installation, so like there's so much to do. So I always encourage people, especially with kids, to get out and search for those hidden gems. Like, they're everywhere. Like, you may have to drive a little bit, but that's okay. Like, make the best of where you are, and build friends. Build those friendships. Make your little tribe of other spouses and military kids, because they need them. Like, I mean, the kids need people that they connect with. Like, my son, I know, has friends that have civilian parents, and they've already asked, like, well, why is your dad not home? And I'm like, okay, I got to explain to them that, well, their dad's in the Army and he has to, go train, or he deployed and he's out fighting the bad guys. Where, his friends that are military, they're like, oh, your dad's deployed too? Mine is too. Like, let's be best friends. So.
Yeah, even over, like, and deployments suck. They're not they're not something that we'd want to do like freely or whatever. I know a lot of people volunteer to deploy, but it's not something like, if you actually think about it, like the families are not going to want to volunteer up, their loved one for a deployment. But it's something where you can connect with someone over.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, you hear people volunteering, like, like if my husband was given the opportunity, like, hey, do you want to deploy? He's going to say yes, but that's his job. But that's what he spends every hour, every minute of every day doing. He is training to deploy. And so, and I understand that, like, as a military spouse, but I think I understand it more because I'm a military kid. I've seen so many, like, I've seen from the start to finish. Like, I've seen the start of and finish of the Iraq or the Afghanistan war. I've seen where the deployments were 18 to 20 months long to where they were, moved to 9 months. I've seen the times where casualties were really big. And then other times where it's like a paid vacation going to Kuwait. Like, we joke like, oh, we're being deployed to Kuwait. And we're like, oh, so you're just taking a glorified holiday work trip kind of thing.
Yeah.
You got full MWR and you're just going to go work out every single day. Like, you're fine. But you have some people who didn't grow up military are like, oh my God, they're in Kuwait. Like, what's going to happen? And I think that helps being a military kid. Like, if you transition from being a military kid into being like a spouse or a soldier yourself, you have that understanding of what families go through on the back end. I think that's really important. I think that's why I'm also an FRG leader, because, the FRG always kind of has that stigma of, being kind of catty or not useful or anything like that. But I genuinely believe that, from my experiences as a military kid and knowing what I went through as a family member to becoming a spouse and what I went through deployments, that like being a resource and helping people navigate uncharted waters for a lot of people is really important. So I try to do my little part to help those who have no idea, because it can be scary, especially when you have kids. My deployments with my husband previously, we didn't have kids. These rapid deployments, we had kids, and it's a completely different experience.
Yeah, because you have to not only, care for yourself, but care for the kids as well. And
then like explaining it to them, like trying to like explain it on a level that they understand without saying like, your dad's getting shot at, he's shooting at people. Like, you don't really want to tell your kids that, but like, I mean, that's what's happening. So
yeah, you have to kind of shield the reality to a certain extent, and break it down to their level of what actually is going on.
Yep.
Yeah. What was it like kind of, doing those overseas moves or, living in another country?
So my very first time flying an airplane, the very first time was when I moved overseas for the first time. And I was so scared.
It's a long flight too.
It's a long flight. Like, I was just like, we're moving to Germany and I have to get on a plane. So, I was really nervous. It wasn't a lot of fun. Actually, a lot of my memories from my flights are from going back and forth from overseas. I remember coming to visit my biological dad in Tennessee, and we had to change like airports because there was like a plane crash at the airport we were supposed to fly out of. I remember flying over one time and something went wrong with our plane, so we had to make an emergency landing in like New England area. I don't remember where it was, but we had to get off the plane and we had to stay overnight. I remember flying on like C-17s and freezing my tail off because it was so cold and just surrounded by military personnel. That was really, it was really cool, but that was a really cool experience to kind of like do that as well. But it was exciting. When we first moved overseas, we moved to this little town. That base is no longer there. Like we lived there for a year and we closed that base down. And it was so cool because like we never lived on base overseas. Overseas they have what, I don't know if they still have it. I'm assuming they do. but they had like these little clusters of housing that they would put military members in. So like they would contract, like they would have like 2 rows of like duplexes, and it would just be all military families, but it would just be nestled in a little town outside of base. That was really cool. I'm really glad my parents chose to do that rather than live on base. So I got to really engulf the environment.
Yeah.
I got to experience like, meeting local Germans and going to like the bakeries. I had a lot of freedom when I lived over there. My parents felt more comfortable giving me more freedom over there because they felt it was safer. So like, I was able to like jump on the train and go to the next town over and just go to my friend's house. And I, could do that by myself. We're here, they're like, yeah, no, you're not staying out past 11.
Yeah.
At 18. So I was just like, okay, mom, like chill for a second. No, but it was a really great experience. I went to school on base with all American families. Some of my most favorite experiences from school were from those schools. The teachers were great. They're my most memorable teachers. Like I can remember their names and I can remember what they taught me and special moments I had with them. But I think it's just because like they were either military spouses or they just worked with military families for their entire career. So they were able to connect with us a little bit better.
Yeah.
Like they knew when we were going through hard times, like when there was deployments or long training exercises. So it was really genuinely like such a good experience. And I know that there's people who've lived overseas that didn't enjoy it. But then like they didn't go out and experience it. Like, every weekend we were at some festival. There's always something happening, which is what I loved about it. I loved that there was always something going on. Like we could go to this town this weekend and enjoy the like Oktoberfest, but then like next weekend they were doing like a medieval fest in the other town. So there was just something always to do. I'm a huge history person. So I love seeing all the sites and like exploring like castles. I mean, like who would want to go explore a castle?
Yeah, exactly.
That was standing during the medieval time frame. So it was really exciting. And I hope to one day be able to take my kids, even if it's just a vacation. I want to take my husband. My favorite trip of all time was when we went to France and we visited Normandy Beach and that whole area. And it was just really refreshing. Not refreshing is probably not the right word, but it was really inspiring to visit a place that also was a huge event for the American history and for, I know we come from a really long line of a military family, both sides. So it was just interesting to know, like, at some point we knew someone who was here during that time frame. So it was really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool to connect the dots and like, think back in, your family tree and connect all of that and kind of experience some of what the environment was like and the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the last questions I always ask is what advice you would give to another military children or a child.
To give to another military child, and this kind of goes to anybody who's in the military, I feel like even to spouses, is to roll with the punches. Sometimes the situation is going to suck so much that like you don't even like care anymore. But I promise you that at some point it's going to be a positive, whether it's immediate, a couple years down the road, or like a decade down the road. Like it's going to be a positive in some way or another. And don't worry about like missing out on your friends. Like you'll make new friends first off. Like who doesn't want more friends?
Exactly.
If those friends that you currently have are genuinely like true friends, they're going to stay in contact, especially nowadays. You guys have social media. So like it's going to be a lot easier to keep in contact. But you have that potential to meet your significant other, a best friend that you'll have until you die. I mean, I joke with my best friend, like we joke that we're going to get like a plot of land and we're going to build 2 houses and we're going to connect the bridge to it and we're going to retire together. So my husband might not like that idea. But we joke like, we're going to be like, eventually we're going to be in the same town again. She's in Texas. She lives in Austin. So like, we're not close to each other at all. And even when we were close together, we didn't always get to see each other, but like, we were like, one day we'll be in the same town again and we'll like be those cranky old ladies who will do art together all the time.
Yeah.
So you just have to just roll the punches. Don't be mad at your parents when they say you're moving again. It is their fault, but it's not their fault kind of thing. So, don't hold it to them. They're just trying to give you the best life they can. And the military life has so much to offer to every single individual, and you just have to take it and hang on for the ride.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story of being a military child and even now, being a spouse. I know it's a crazy world, but I wouldn't have it any other way. So. Yes. Well, thank you.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Grace of a Military Child podcast. If you enjoyed listening, don't forget to follow, like, share, subscribe, review, and comment. You can also follow us at Grace of a Military Child podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for more podcast-related content. If you or someone you know is a military child who would like to be on the podcast, please send us a message to one of our social media platforms, or you can send an email to grace.of.a.military.child@gmail.com. Tune in next Thursday to hear another incredible journey.